I'm Jon Lentz, City and State's Managing Editor. Earlier this week, I interviewed Pat Foye, the Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, as part of our Newsmaker series. In today's last look, we wanted to show you some excerpts from that interview. And I want to start out with a question looking to 2021. I think that's the year the Port Authority will be 100 years old. It'll be a little over 7 years from now. I'm not sure if you'll be here or not, but where would you like the Port Authority to be at that 100-year mark?
What do I want the Port Authority to be? One is the leading transportation infrastructure agency in the country. Two, a solid, credit-worthy institution at a time where lots of credits in the business and government and municipal communities have been degraded. That's not important just for a rating agency's approval. It's important because the types of projects and investments the Port Authority does are going to be much easier and frankly much cheaper to execute if we've got a lower cost of capital. That means the Board of Commissioners, the staff at all levels being responsible stewards of every dollar that we're trusted with and squeezing maximum value out of every dollar. Three is, I think at that point, the Port Authority's unique experience as a real estate developer, which began in the late 50s and 60s with Governor Nelson Rockefeller and his brother David at Chase Manhattan Bank, and then obviously round two following the murderous tragedy of 9/11, I think will have been completed. One World Trade Center, Jano gave a report on the site. The progress is both extraordinary and tangible and visible. One World Trade Center, we're going to be finished with construction later this year. Tenant fit out is going to begin in the first quarter. Condé Nast is going to be preparing to move in 2014. But I think the real estate development phase of the Port Authority will be behind it. One of the things that I think both Governor Cuomo and Christie and the entire Board of Commissioners is focused on is the importance of airports, which is one of the reasons that we've gathered here today. And just to give you some idea, 500,000 people in the region work at the airports. Indirect jobs is hundreds of thousands of dollars added to that. Wages at the airports alone are $20 billion, and economic activity at the three big airports, obviously LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark, is over $60 billion annually. Now, the New York, New Jersey economy is a large one, but even in the context of that, 500,000 people employed, paying their mortgages, sending their kids to school, and advancing up the ladder of American prosperity is an extraordinary thing. So I think this is a Port Authority under the leadership of Governor Cuomo and Christie that are focused on return to basics. Basics is, and return to core mission. And that is airports, it's bridges and tunnels. I can talk a little bit about the work we're doing on Goethals and Bayonne, new Goethals Bridge being built with private capital. We're proud of that. Raising the roadway of the Bayonne to enable post-Panama Canal expansion ships to enter the harbor on both sides. It affects Howland Hook and Staten Island, as well as 4 of the 5 New Jersey container terminal operations, an extraordinarily important investment. And just being focused laser-like on public transportation infrastructure on which the region's economy and the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers is founded, getting that right and being laser-focused on it.
Well, now Joe gave us a good introduction on the airports and the issues. What do you see as the major challenges there, and what is the Port Authority doing to address those right now?
Well, look, major challenges include the fact that, good news, 109 million passengers came to the 3 major airports last year. We expect we're going to do better in 2013. That represented a rate of growth over 11, about 3.3%. That was significantly higher than the national average, which was a little bit below 1% in 12 over 11. So we've got to be poised for that growth. Joe's exactly right. 50 million people, visitors, came to New York City last year. That's extraordinarily important because of the jobs it creates. It's an environmentally friendly industry. It's also an industry that creates entry-level positions, whether it's in hotels or restaurants or on Broadway, at Citi Field. I was going to call it Shea Stadium for a second, forgive me. Citi Field and Yankee Stadium and all the various industries that operate in New York. People want to come to New York. We've got to be able to serve them, one. Two, Joe made the point about competition, and competition is right. We have to all be careful not to take the view that people have to come to New York, which means they have to use JFK and LaGuardia and Newark. That may continue for a time, but people do have alternatives. Thirdly, from an economic point of view, we got to remember the results of the study that Kathy Wild led at the Partnership for New York City a couple of years ago, which indicated that air traffic congestion delays alone accounted for a burden on the New York and New Jersey economy of about $2.7 billion a year. And over the period from 2008 to 2025, that present-day burden on today's economy is going to be nearly $80 billion. We've got to be prepared for that. We've got to invest in that. That's going to require a partnership of the Port Authority, State of New York, State of New Jersey, New York City. Our federal partners, including our congressional delegation, are going to be major players in this. There are technological answers to part of this. There's a technology called NextGen that I think is critical that the FAA move forward. It's critical also that it be installed here first in New York because as Frank Sinatra famously said, to paraphrase, if you can fix it in New York from an ATC point of view, you can fix it anywhere. I think that's how the song went. And it's important to get it right. There are also smaller, lower grade technological and financial investments that we can collectively make. Obviously, the airlines are going to be key players here. Together with our private partners, the airlines and others at the airport, over the 15-year period that'll end in 5 or 6 years, a total of $15 billion will have been invested over that 15-year period. Port Authority's made a significant amount of that investment, but so have carriers like Delta and JetBlue and United and others. We're focused right now on the Central Terminal building at LaGuardia, which is the only one of the terminals at the New York airports that the Port Authority owns and operates. I'm not proud of its condition. We all fly in and out of it frequently. That's the terminal that currently accommodates American and United and JetBlue and some other smaller carriers, and it's obsolete. It serves way more people than it was designed for, and we've got a plan. We'll be issuing an RFP sometime later this month. We've pre-qualified 4, I think, world-class bidders for the Central Terminal building, and over the period that RFP, as I mentioned, will go out sometime this month. Construction to start around this time next year, and that's about a $3.5 billion project. It's going to create lots of construction jobs, lots of economic activity, but is going to increase itself capacity at at LaGuardia Airport without adding a new gate, without adding a new runway, and is going to have a far superior customer experience for the millions of people that will come through the Central Terminal building.
Another issue with the airlines, I think, is passenger facility charges. As the federal government has, cut funding for airports, they've proposed maybe raising these fees on passengers that could go to help the capital program for the airports. I think it helped the air train, for example. Do you see any progress on that front?
Well, the current PFC has been set at $4.50 for some number of years. It generates about $220 million a year of money that is used for airport capital improvements, including, John, as you just suggested, the air train. There will be a PFC allocation in the Central Terminal building. I think there is concern, legitimate concern by airlines around the country that in some cases airline operators, and certainly not the Port Authority because our airports are bursting at the seams, but that some airport operators rather around the country have kind of taken a, if we build it, they will come approach. And in some cases, the airlines have been understandably and legitimately concerned about a, kind of a Taj Mahal approach to terminal building. We don't have the luxury of either of those given the number of passengers that are going through our airports annually, and I think no one in this room or in the region will accuse any terminal at LaGuardia, for instance, of being a Taj Mahal. I'll actually note that my colleague Tom Bosco, who runs LaGuardia, but is also, I'm proud to say, the new acting aviation director of the Port Authority, is in the back of the room. And I think there are many criticisms one could make of Port Authority facilities. Taj Mahal airport terminals is not one of them. But the airports have that legitimate concern, and I think in certain cases around the country, not here, not in this part of the nation, you could question whether airport terminal investments have always been wise, and whether if you build it, they will come approach has borne out in reality. I think the $220 million that we get out of PFCs, I think we're wise custodians of. I think there ought to be a serious debate, and it's a discussion we've had with the global folks as well as with members of the congressional delegation as to whether the PFC ought to be looked at from a level point of view. Perhaps indexing to inflation is something that some have suggested, and I think that's something that ought to be seriously looked at by policymakers.
And shifting from policy to the politics a little bit, obviously there's a mayoral race this year.
So I've read.
But you don't hear much about the Port Authority. I think Joe Lota made fun of the Port Authority cops, calling them mall cops. But outside of that, you haven't heard too much in terms of the airports, in terms of some of these other key issues. Why do you think that is, or do you think there are some of the candidates out there that are talking about things like the airports?
Well, look, Joe Lota was a colleague, and I hold him in high regard. I think he's apologized appropriately for his mall cop comments. I'll note that on the site behind me on 9/11, 37 members of the Port Authority Police Department were murdered that day, along with thousands of other people. So I don't think I have to defend the Port Authority Police and their role here, because I think their service over the last 90 some odd years at the Port Authority speaks for itself. Look, John, if your question is, am I angling for the Port Authority to become a big issue in the mayoral election, next question.